What if the world is living inside a cave of illusions? Learn the powerful idea of a new renaissance and how it can change your thinking, your future, and your life. I believe we need to take the idea of a new renaissance very seriously. In this video, I want to respond to some common objections, explain clearly what I mean by a new renaissance, who it is meant for, and why I think it is truly possible. Since I started speaking about this idea in October last year, several YouTube channels and Substack writers have discussed it as well. Most of them support the movement, and I am grateful for their encouragement and for adding their voices to the conversation. However, some people seem to be talking about something quite different, or they imagine the Renaissance as something else entirely. So in this first video essay about my project, I want to introduce what I call a Renaissance moment, which is the central idea of my argument. To explain this idea, I want to begin with a famous story from philosophy that I wish had ended differently, the allegory of the cave by Plato in Book 7 of the Republic. Perhaps you already know this story. It describes a group of prisoners who have been chained inside a deep, dark cave since childhood. They are tied in such a way that they can only look straight ahead at a wall. Behind them, a fire burns, and objects pass in front of the fire. The light creates shadows on the wall in front of the prisoners. These moving shadows are the only things the prisoners can see. Because they have lived their entire lives in the cave, they believe the shadows are real. They have no other experience of the world. In fact, they even reward those who are best at recognizing and explaining the shadows. Others repeat these explanations, which makes the illusion stronger. For them, the shadows are not just images, they are reality itself. The cave in this story is a completely closed system. Nothing new ever enters it. No fresh information comes from outside. The prisoners never see real objects, only the same shadows moving again and again on the wall. The same fire burns, the same light shines, and the same images repeat in an endless cycle. The prisoner's whole world is limited to watching and explaining these shadows. Their reality is small, controlled, and constantly repeated. But one day, something unexpected happens. One prisoner somehow breaks free from his chains. For the first time, he is able to move around inside the cave. He turns his head and sees the fire behind him, the true source of the light. He also sees real, solid objects passing in front of the fire. Slowly, he begins to understand that the shadows on the wall are only reflections of these real objects. The shadows are not reality, they are only copies. Curious and brave, he continues his journey. He walks upward and discovers the mouth of the cave. Then he steps outside into the bright daylight. At first, the light is painful and blinding. His eyes are not used to it. But gradually, they adjust. Little by little, he begins to see clearly. Now he sees living things, trees, plants, animals, clouds moving across the sky. And above everything else, he sees the sun, the true source of all light and life. He feels amazed and overwhelmed by the beauty and richness of this new world. Filled with excitement and compassion, he decides to return to the cave to share this discovery with the other prisoners. However, going back is not easy. His eyes are now used to the bright sunlight, so the darkness of the cave feels even deeper than before. He struggles to see as he makes his way through the shadows. Finally, he reaches the chained prisoners and tells them about what he has seen, the fire, the real objects, the trees, the sky, and the world beyond the cave. But the other prisoners refuse to move. They do not believe him. Instead, they accuse him of being crazy. They say, "Look at him. He left the cave, and now he has come back half blind. He can't even see properly in the dark, and he wants to teach us about light." They warn the others not to follow him. "If you leave the cave," they say, "you will return confused and blind like this man." Choosing the comfort of what they know, even if it is false, they reject him and refuse to step outside. On a simple level, Plato's story is about knowledge. It shows how searching for truth can lift us out of ignorance and help us see reality more clearly. But on a deeper level, it is also a story about spiritual and intellectual awakening. It reminds us how easily we can be tricked by illusions and how often we choose the safety of familiar ideas instead of the risk of discovering something new. The story also shows how difficult it is to introduce new ideas to people who feel comfortable or who are not ready to change. Yet I often wonder, what if the prisoners had listened? What if they had chosen freedom instead of fear? What new truths would they have discovered about the world, and about themselves? History shows that there have been special moments when whole societies did something like this. At certain times, cultures have broken free from old limits and entered periods of great creativity and discovery. I call these times Renaissance moments. During these rare periods, art, philosophy, and creative energy come together in powerful ways. Scientific discoveries increase. New styles of art appear. Fresh ideas reshape how people think. It is as if a tired culture, bored with watching the same shadows again and again, finally stands up and walks into the light. These moments of shared awakening do not happen often, but when they do, they change everything. They shape how people think and feel for generations. In fact, our modern way of understanding the world is the result of such past awakenings. This project and these lectures invite each of us to help create such a rebirth today. We live in a time when many people feel worried about the future of art, literature, and culture. Reading levels are falling in many places, and technology is developing very quickly, often without careful thought. In such a time, the idea of a new renaissance is not just interesting, it may be necessary. Today, political conversations are becoming more divided and often less clear. People speak past one another instead of listening. Around the world, and especially in the United States, many universities are reducing funding for the humanities, such as literature, philosophy, and the arts. All of this can make it feel as if we are moving toward a new dark age. But history shows us something surprising. Periods of cultural renewal often begin in times like these. A Renaissance moment is not the same as a perfect golden age. This is a common criticism I hear. People ask, how can a Renaissance happen when the world is full of violence, conflict, and injustice? Yet great cultural movements often grow during political and religious conflict, in the shadow of war, or even after devastating pandemics. The darkness does not last forever. In fact, the spirit of a renaissance can be like a strong wind that pushes away heavy clouds. These powerful moments are often born in crisis. If we act wisely and courageously, our own time could become the beginning of a new renaissance. The purpose of these lectures and this project, both on Substack and YouTube, is to give us the language to understand what many people call our current cultural dark age. We often hear that creativity is declining and that culture feels stagnant. There is some truth in this. But history teaches us that renaissances frequently begin in periods that look very much like our own. By studying the similarities between past Renaissance moments and identifying opportunities for renewal today, I hope to show that cultural rebirth is not an accident. It is something people can actively create together. Now let us look more closely at the word Renaissance. The word itself means rebirth. Historians began using this term in the 19th century to describe the period now known as the European Renaissance, which lasted roughly from the 1400s to the 1600s. This era marked a major shift away from certain medieval limitations and saw a powerful revival of art, learning, and science. If we trace the word back further, we find the Italian writer Giorgio Vasari, who used the word rinascita, meaning rebirth, to describe the revival of the arts in his time. From this idea of rebirth comes the deeper meaning of what I call a Renaissance moment, a time when culture wakes up, renews itself, and begins again with fresh creative energy. Giorgio Vasari wrote about this idea of rebirth in his famous book Lives of the Artists. In that work, he described the revival of art in his time as a rinascita, a rebirth. Later scholars adopted this word and developed it into the broader concept of the Renaissance. One of the first historians to use the term to describe an entire historical period was the French historian Jules Michelet in the 19th century. In his large, multi-volume work History of France, especially in the section covering the years 1484 to 1550, he explained what the word Renaissance meant to different people. For lovers of beauty, he said, it meant the arrival of new art and the free flowering of imagination. For scholars, it meant a return to classical learning. For legal thinkers, it meant bringing order and clarity to old and confusing systems of law. Other important thinkers helped shape this idea as well. The Swiss historian Jacob Burckhardt expanded on the concept of the Renaissance as a powerful cultural transformation. The Victorian writer Walter Pater also played a key role in making the term widely known. In his book Studies in the History of the Renaissance, Pater described the Renaissance as an outbreak of the human spirit, a time when a new energy broke through the limits that medieval religious systems had placed on the heart and imagination. Notice how these historians emphasize imagination, creativity, and the inner life of human beings. For them, the Renaissance was not just about events, it was about a new way of thinking and feeling. When we speak of the Renaissance today, we usually mean the European Renaissance. This was a period of major change in politics, science, art, and religion. In just one decade, remarkable works appeared that challenged long-accepted beliefs. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote the first draft of The Prince, questioning traditional ideas about political power. Nicolaus Copernicus developed his heliocentric model of the solar system, which later transformed science. Martin Luther published his 95 Theses, challenging the authority of the Church. Each of these works reshaped politics, science, or religion in profound ways. This period was also a time of extraordinary creativity. Writers began to use their local languages instead of Latin, making literature more accessible to ordinary people. Europe rediscovered many classical texts, including Republic by Plato, with its famous allegory of the cave. Humanist thinkers, artists, scientists, and philosophers looked back to ancient Greece and Rome and found ideas that had been neglected for centuries. They revived these ideas and combined them with new discoveries, creating fresh artistic techniques, new theories, and bold intellectual movements. It was truly a time of expansion, freedom, and renewed imagination, a powerful example of what a Renaissance moment can look like. It is also important to remember that the European Renaissance did not begin in a peaceful or stable time. It emerged during periods of plague, shortly after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and during a time when the medieval scholastic system in universities had grown rigid and stagnant. In other words, this great cultural revival was born in an age marked by death, confusion, war, and political division. The return to classical learning and bold artistic innovation was not a luxury, it was, in many ways, a desperate attempt to recover meaning, order, and human dignity. At the same time, we should not think of the Renaissance as one single, clearly defined historical box. Historians often place it between the 14th and 17th centuries, but there is no perfectly agreed upon starting or ending date. The idea of a Renaissance is more flexible than that. It describes a process of rebirth rather than a neatly limited period. Cultures can experience renewal more than once. This is what I mean by a Renaissance moment. It happens when a society, influenced by new ideas and new energy, reimagines its political systems, spiritual beliefs, and artistic expressions. It adopts a new vision of what it means to be human. When this happens, the change spreads into almost every area of life: art, architecture, music, philosophy, science, literature, and even technology. Scientific discoveries and technological breakthroughs often help push these moments forward, preparing the way for wider cultural transformation. To understand how our own time might be moving towards such a rebirth, this project will explore 4 major Renaissance moments in history. The first, which I have already introduced, is the European Renaissance. We will also study Romanticism, sometimes called the Romantic Revival, the American Renaissance, and the Modernism. By examining their art, literature, and cultural achievements, we will see that each of these movements arose from conditions similar to our own. They grew out of times of cultural alienation, rapid industrial change, feelings of dehumanization, and strong political and ideological division. Yet from these difficult conditions came powerful creativity and lasting renewal. For example, the movement known as Romanticism began during the Industrial Revolution, when factories were spreading across Europe and changing both the landscape and daily life. The English poet William Blake famously described these factories as dark satanic mills. New machines increased production and wealth, but they also filled cities with smoke and noise. At the same time, many thinkers of the age valued reason above all else and often placed profit ahead of human well-being. Imagination, emotion, and a deep connection to nature were pushed aside. Romantic artists and philosophers strongly challenged this way of thinking. They reimagined the relationship between human beings and the natural world. They argued that imagination was not childish or weak but a powerful creative force. Through poetry, painting, and philosophy, they explored emotion, beauty, and what they called the sublime, experiences of awe and wonder in nature. In doing so, they offered a response to the cold logic of factories and railways. They also criticized social injustice and imagined the possibility of a more humane and just society. Even though mechanization and industrial growth continued, the ideas of the Romantics did not disappear. Their insights continued to influence culture throughout the Victorian period and even into the modernism. They helped inspire reforms in education, politics, and social life. In many ways, their legacy gives us a model for thinking about our own age of rapid technological change. Just as they responded creatively to the machine age of their time, we too can rethink our relationship to technology and industry. Another important example is the American Renaissance of the 19th century. This movement developed during a time of growing tension in the United States, especially in the years leading up to the Civil War. At that time, many people believed that great literature belonged mainly to Europe. But writers and thinkers such as Margaret Fuller and Ralph Waldo Emerson began, in the 1840s, to call for a distinctly American voice in art and literature. Soon, writers like Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, and Emily Dickinson helped create that voice. They broke away from strict European models and experimented with new forms and themes. Many of them spoke openly against slavery and supported abolition. During this period, a distinct African American literary tradition also began to grow, shaping the future of American culture. The American Renaissance shows us that cultural renewal is not only about art and beauty, it is also about civic responsibility and moral courage. It reminds us that creative rebirth often happens when writers and thinkers imagine a more just and inclusive society. It is striking that many of the greatest poets and philosophers of Romanticism and the American Renaissance were not isolated dreamers. They were politically aware and often outspoken. Their art was not only beautiful, it became a powerful tool for democratic discussion and social imagination. Through poetry, essays, and public lectures, they helped bring different voices together and shape a stronger cultural identity. Their work shows that art can influence public life and help guide a nation's moral direction. Moving into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we see another powerful wave of renewal, modernism. This movement included important cultural revivals such as the Irish Literary Revival and the Harlem Renaissance. Both challenged long-standing artistic traditions and experimented with bold new ways of representing human consciousness. In many ways, this search for new forms of expression was central to the modernist project. The Irish Literary Revival developed after the Great Famine and a long period of mass emigration. It was a cultural awakening that aimed to preserve and renew Irish identity, which many feared was disappearing. One of its major figures was W.B. Yeats, who used poetry and drama to celebrate Irish myth, history, and spirit. This revival later inspired other movements, including the Harlem Renaissance in the United States. The Harlem Renaissance grew out of the Great Migration, when many African Americans moved from the rural South to northern cities, and from the harsh realities of racial segregation under Jim Crow laws. It became a bold redefinition of Black cultural identity in the face of systemic oppression. Writers, musicians, and artists created powerful new works that expressed pride, resilience, and creativity. In doing so, they reshaped American culture as a whole. More broadly, modernism emerged from the trauma of World War I and the deep disillusionment that followed. The old social and political order seemed to have collapsed. In response, artists and writers rejected traditional forms and invented new techniques to express the complexity and fragmentation of modern life. The scholar Hugh Kenner even described modernism as a second Renaissance. Under the pressures of global conflict and rapid industrial change, writers such as Virginia Woolf, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, and James Joyce experimented with new narrative styles, shifting perspectives, and stream of consciousness techniques. Their innovations created highly sophisticated forms of art that changed literature forever. At the same time, communities whose cultures had long been suppressed experienced creative explosions of energy and expression. Out of war, displacement, and crisis came a remarkable renewal of imagination, another powerful example of a Renaissance moment. These, then, are the four Renaissance moments we will study more closely. As we explore them, we will see something surprising. Many of these great cultural revivals were not led mainly by universities or official institutions. They were often started by ordinary readers, writers, and thinkers working outside formal systems of power. For example, the Platonic Academy in Florence, founded by Marsilio Ficino, helped spark the European Renaissance. Yet it was not created as a formal university department. It grew from a circle of patrons, students, and friends who gathered to study and discuss ideas together. It was a community of shared curiosity rather than an official institution. The same pattern appears in Romanticism. Many of its most important poets were not academic professionals. William Blake worked as an engraver. Samuel Taylor Coleridge attended university but never completed a degree. Percy Bysshe Shelley was expelled from Oxford. John Clare, sometimes called the peasant poet, came from a farming background. John Keats trained as a medical apprentice. These were not powerful elites, they were often working people who read deeply and wrote passionately. During the American Renaissance, we see something similar. Ralph Waldo Emerson had left his position as a pastor and had no strong institutional support when he published his essay Nature in 1836, a work that helped ignite the movement. Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson were essentially amateur writers, composing poems alongside their regular daily responsibilities. They were not university professors shaping culture from above, they were individuals shaping it from within ordinary life. Even in modernism, many leading figures lived outwardly ordinary lives. T.S. Eliot worked as a banker. Marianne Moore was a librarian. Langston Hughes worked as a journalist. Wallace Stevens was an insurance executive. Many of the greatest artists and thinkers began as what we might call amateur poets, independent readers, and self-taught philosophers, often members of the educated working or middle classes. By showing the similarities between their circumstances and our own, this new Renaissance project suggests something hopeful. Renaissance moments begin in the habits, conversations, and creative work of ordinary people. You might ask, then, when would a new Renaissance begin? Or has it already begun? Ultimately, history will decide. Future generations will look back and judge the importance of our time. A Renaissance does not usually have one clear starting date. Still, if I had to suggest a beginning, I would point to the early 2000s. During that period, the Internet rapidly expanded, digital media became more powerful, and global connectivity increased dramatically. These changes created new spaces for learning, creativity, and collaboration, conditions that, in the past, have often prepared the way for cultural rebirth. The Internet has changed the very fabric of our reality, and many of those changes have been misused or even harmful. But it also creates a remarkable opportunity. Today, the Internet shapes how ideas are created, shared, and experienced, all within a vast, interconnected digital ecosystem. It allows for instant cultural exchange across the globe, something that previous generations of thinkers could only have dreamed of. Tools like social media, open access platforms, digital archives, and even the smartphone, which we often criticize, actually give us the means to shape what a new Renaissance might look like. This is a moment of distributed, collaborative, and highly participatory cultural renewal, where ordinary people can play a central role. A Renaissance truly begins when society recognizes this change of wind, when a new wave of creativity and imagination emerges, rather than just lamenting what has been lost. This moment is open to anyone willing to engage with it, anyone who wants to reclaim, reinterpret, and build upon the great traditions of knowledge, art, and culture. It is a chance for all of us to participate in shaping the next era of human creativity. We can think of the major Renaissance moments of the past as points, or nodes, within a larger network of cultural renewal. What this project emphasizes is that ordinary readers, writers, and artists, through small daily acts of curiosity, reflection, and creativity, can revive the very imagination that once sparked these great historical renaissances. The goal of these lectures is to help reignite a collective cultural imagination for our own time. By drawing on the best of the past, nurturing what remains, and encouraging what is beginning to grow, we can create a new wave of cultural renewal. My hope is that the idea of a new Renaissance invites all of us to become active participants in this process, agents of rebirth who help shape a healthier, more democratic society and honor the human spirit's capacity for renewal. With this foundation laid in today's lecture, the next sessions will explore specific Renaissance moments in greater depth. I want to give special thanks to everyone supporting this work. You make this conversation possible. I'm excited to answer questions, share ideas, and continue the discussion. And to everyone watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and joining this journey toward a new Renaissance.